The sun hovered low over the Arizona plains, throwing long shadows across the dry earth. Dust shimmered in the heat like smoke from an unseen fire. Elias Carter stood by the corral, his weathered hands resting on the fence rail, eyes following the slow, steady movements of his cattle. He was 62 years old, body stiff from a lifetime of ranch work, but his spirit hadn't aged a day. Behind him, the faint laughter of his 12-year-old son, Thomas, drifted from the barn. The boy was chasing a loose chicken, his boots too big, his hat too wide, but his smile was pure sunlight. For Elias, that sound was everything. The ranch wasn't much, just 24 head of cattle, a modest barn, and a cabin his wife had once filled with songs before sickness took her. Her photograph sat above the mantel, framed in worn pine. Every morning Elias tipped his hat to it before heading out, whispering the same promise, "I'll raise him right, Mary. I'll make you proud." That afternoon, he felt something strange in the air. The wind shifted, carrying the faint rumble of hooves from the south. When he turned, 3 riders were kicking up dust along the ridge. They moved with the kind of confidence that didn't belong to honest men. Elias wiped his brow and told Thomas to get inside. "Don't come out unless I call you," he said. The boy's laughter stopped. He obeyed without question. The riders drew up near the porch. The lead man was tall, well-fed, with a thick black mustache that curled at the ends. His duster coat was clean despite the dust, his revolver polished. The other 2 flanked him, eyes cold, hands resting on their holsters. "You Elias Carter?" the leader asked. Elias nodded. "That's right." The man smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "Name's Briggs. I work for Mr. Clayton Ward." "You know the name." Elias did. Ward owned half the valley already, by money, threat, or gun. Every rancher who refused to sell either vanished or left with broken bones and an empty heart. Elias met Briggs's gaze calmly. "I know him. Don't care to." "Well," Briggs said, pulling out a folded paper, "you ought to start. Mr. Ward's making one last offer. $500 for your spread, the livestock, and the rights to that stream behind your barn." Elias laughed under his breath. 500 wouldn't buy the nails in that barn. This land was my wife's dream. She's buried under that willow yonder. I ain't selling it. Briggs's smile faded. "You're making a mistake, old man. Ward doesn't like no for an answer." "I've been saying no to men like Ward since before you could ride," Elias replied. His voice stayed steady, but his hand twitched near his side, not for a gun, he hadn't carried one in years, but from the ache of knowing what was coming. Briggs's eyes hardened. He glanced at his men. "Teach him how to say yes." The first blow came so fast Elias barely saw it. A fist to the gut folded him in half. The second cracked against his jaw, knocking him to the porch. His head hit wood, stars bursting behind his eyes. He tried to push himself up, but a boot caught him in the ribs. Another, then another. Inside the cabin, Thomas heard the crash and ran to the window. He froze at the sight, his father's body twisting under their boots, blood spilling from his lip. Without thinking, he bolted outside, screaming, "Leave him alone." One of the men turned, sneered, and backhanded the boy so hard he hit the ground. "Stay down, runt, stop," Elias gasped, crawling toward his son. His voice broke. "Please, he's just a child." Briggs squatted beside him, grabbed a handful of his shirt, and yanked him up close. "You can end this, old man. Just sign." He shoved the contract into Elias's face. Elias spat blood onto it. "You can take that paper and burn it in hell." Briggs's expression turned from irritation to rage. He stood, motioned to his men. "Break him." The sound of their laughter would haunt Thomas forever, the way they found joy in cruelty, in his father's pain. Each strike felt like it was landing on his own heart. His father's body jerked, groaned, then fell still. The men finally stepped back, breathing hard. Briggs looked down at the mess they'd made, disgusted. "Ward won't be happy," he muttered. "Can't buy land from a corpse." He spat, swung onto his horse, and rode off with the others, their laughter echoing long after they vanished into the desert. Thomas crawled to his father, sobbing. "Pa, please, please get up." Elias's chest still rose faintly. His eyes fluttered open. "Thomas," his voice was barely a whisper. "I'll get help. No." Elias's trembling hand caught his son's wrist. "Listen to me, boy." His voice was fragile, but every word carried weight. "Don't carry hate. It'll eat you alive. Promise me." Thomas shook his head, tears streaking his dusty face. "They killed you, Pa." "I can't." "Promise me," Elias rasped, his voice cracking. You live, you learn, you come back strong. But not cruel. Promise. The boy swallowed his fury, choking on grief. I promise, Pa. A faint smile touched Elias's lips. That's my boy. Then the light left his eyes. Thomas stayed there until the stars came out. He didn't move even when the coyotes howled. When dawn broke, he dug a grave beneath the willow tree. His small hands blistered, the shovel heavy, the tears endless. He placed his father's hat on the grave, whispering through trembling lips, I'll come back, Pa. I swear it. For 3 days he stayed by that mound, refusing to eat, refusing to leave. On the 4th, he packed a small sack, his father's old rifle, a canteen, a bit of bread, and the silver locket that held a lock of his mother's hair. He took one last look at the cabin, the corral, the hill where the sun always rose, and then he turned toward the open desert. The heat was merciless. His lips cracked, his skin burned, but he kept walking. Every step was a whisper of pain and memory. When his legs finally gave out, he fell to his knees in the sand. His vision blurred. He thought he saw figures moving in the mirage, riders gliding across the dunes. Then everything went black. When he woke, he wasn't dead. The first thing he saw was the flicker of firelight and faces, bronze, silent, painted with ash and ochre. An old Apache woman crouched beside him, pressing a damp cloth to his forehead. A tall warrior with deep scars across his chest stood nearby, watching. His eyes were sharp but not unkind. You are far from your people, the warrior said. Thomas tried to speak, his throat dry. They're gone. The warrior studied him for a long moment. Then perhaps the desert sent you to find new ones. That night, Thomas lay awake, listening to the drums echo through the canyons. For the first time since his father's death, the tears stopped. Something inside him shifted, a seed of strength, small but alive. In the days that followed, the Apaches took him in. The old woman called him, Toi, meaning, the found one. He learned to ride bareback, to hunt, to hear the whisper of wind before a storm. The scarred warrior, Taza, became his mentor, teaching him how to track, how to fight, how to endure. Years passed like that. The boy grew tall, his voice deep, his hands strong. Yet no night passed without him looking up at the stars and whispering, I'll come back, Pa. I'll make it right. And though the boy buried his rage under silence, it never died. It only waited, like the desert after rain, still impatient, until it was time to rise again. The valley looked smaller than he remembered, though maybe it wasn't. The land that had changed, maybe it was him. 10 years could reshape a man in ways the earth never could. Thomas Carter sat tall on his horse at the ridge, the sun painting his scarred face in bronze and gold. Below him stretched the remnants of his childhood, the rolling pastures, the stream that once sparkled like glass, and the broken ruins of the cabin his father built with his own hands. The willow tree was gone, burned to ash, the ground black where his father's grave once lay shaded. He hadn't spoken in a while, not since they'd crossed into the Carter Valley. Around him, 400 Apache warriors sat astride their horses, quiet as ghosts. Feathers swayed in the wind, the glint of obsidian arrowheads catching the morning light. The air felt thick, heavy with memory and purpose. Thomas dismounted slowly, his boots sinking into the same soil where his blood once mixed with his father's. He knelt, tracing the ground with calloused fingers, whispering words meant for no one but the wind. Pa, I made it back. He paused, swallowing hard. You said not to hate. I tried, but the fire don't go out easy. A soft voice spoke behind him. The fire is not meant to go out, said Naomi, Taza's daughter, the woman who had become his closest companion and fiercest challenger. Only a fool lives without fire. But you must decide whether it burns or guides. Thomas rose and turned toward her. The red paint on her cheeks glowed in the sunlight, her eyes steady and calm. Today, he said, it burns. By nightfall, they reached the outskirts of the Ward encampment. The rancher who once ruled this valley now commanded a small army of hired guns. Tents stretched along the stream, torches lit the night, and laughter echoed from around the fires. Thomas could see the arrogance of men who'd never been truly afraid. They guarded what wasn't theirs, the land they'd stolen from both settler and native alike. He watched from the shadows, his warriors waiting for his signal. The plan was simple. Strike fast, end the empire Ward had built on the suffering of others, and reclaim the land without needless killing. But even as Thomas laid out orders, his heart waged war against his father's final words. Every time he saw a man in a black hat, every cruel laugh from the camp, he saw Briggs's face, Ward's smirk, and his father lying broken on that porch. Naomi placed a hand on his arm. "You've carried this weight too long," she murmured. "Don't let vengeance decide the kind of man you become." "I'm not that boy anymore," he said quietly. "But I owe that boy justice." When the moon climbed high, the camp settled. Only a few guards remained awake, half drunk and lazy with false confidence. Thomas moved like a shadow, the rifle slung across his back, the knife at his belt gleaming in the pale light. 2 guards spotted him first. "Who the hell?" one started, but before he could finish, Thomas stepped forward into the torchlight. "I'm the man whose father you beat to death," he said. His voice was low, steady, and colder than the wind. The men froze, eyes wide. One reached for his pistol, but an arrow thudded into the ground between his boots. From the darkness, hundreds of warriors appeared like smoke made flesh. The guards dropped their weapons instantly. Thomas didn't blink. "Go," he said. "Tell your master I've come for him." They ran, stumbling toward the largest tent at the camp's center. Minutes later, Clayton Ward himself emerged. The years hadn't softened him, his belly was heavier, his face puffed and red from drink, but his eyes still carried that same cruel certainty. He squinted into the torchlight. "I'll be damned," Ward said, voice thick with disbelief. "Thomas Carter. Thought you died in the desert like your old man." Thomas stepped closer, the firelight catching the faint scars on his jaw. "You thought wrong." Ward laughed, though it sounded hollow. "So what's this? You bring your new friends to scare me? These savages don't belong here." The words hit the air like a slap. Several Apache warriors shifted, hands tightening on their bows, but Thomas raised a hand to stop them. "You stole this land from them long before you stole mine. You burned their homes just like you burned my father's." Ward's smirk faltered. "That land was business. So was his blood," Thomas asked. "His pain, his death." Ward hesitated. For the first time, Thomas saw something in his eyes, maybe guilt, maybe fear. But it passed quickly. "He stood in the way of progress," Ward said. "That's all." Thomas took another step. "Then I guess I'm standing in your way too." The silence that followed stretched tight as a wire. Behind Thomas, 400 warriors raised their weapons in unison. Ward's hired men stumbled out of their tents, half-dressed, half awake, staring in disbelief at the army that surrounded them. Ward turned in a panic. "Don't just stand there. Shoot them." But no one moved. The men looked at Thomas, the calm in his eyes, the certainty in his stance, and saw what Ward couldn't. They were beaten before a single shot was fired. Thomas walked closer until he stood face to face with the man who had haunted his dreams. "You think I came here to kill you," he said. "But I came to end you." Ward's lip curled. "Then do it. If you've got the guts, do it." Thomas pulled his revolver and aimed it straight at Ward's chest. For a long moment, no one breathed. The world shrank to the sound of the wind whistling through the grass. He could almost hear his father's voice again, the last word spoken on that blood-soaked porch. "Don't hate. Don't go down the same road." His hand trembled. Then slowly, he lowered the gun. "You're not worth the bullet," he said. "But you'll live with what you did. Every man here will know the truth." Ward stared at him, confused, as Thomas raised his voice. "You're leaving this valley tonight. You and every man who works for you. If any of you ever come back, I won't show mercy again." He turned to his warriors. "Take their weapons. Burn the tents. Leave them their lives." The Apaches moved swiftly, disciplined and silent. Rifles clattered to the ground, wagons were overturned, and flames rose high into the night sky. The mercenaries ran into the hills, terrified. Ward stumbled after them, shouting curses that vanished in the smoke. By dawn, the camp was gone, the valley quiet again. The river glistened, untouched, as if it had been waiting for peace. Thomas stood by the ashes of the largest tent, Naomi beside him. Her gaze lingered on him a long moment. "You spared him," she said softly. "He'll die slow," Thomas replied. "Every day he'll remember he was beaten by the man he thought was weak." Naomi nodded. "Your father would be proud." Thomas turned toward the horizon where the first rays of morning touched the land. "He taught me to build, not destroy. Maybe it's time I finally listened." Together, they and the tribe worked to rebuild what had been lost. They mended fences, raised new barns, and planted new willow trees by the stream. The valley slowly began to breathe again, shared by those who had once been enemies but now stood side by side. Weeks later, Thomas stood before his father's grave, the rebuilt ranch behind him. He placed a fresh hat on the cross and whispered, "You said to come back strong, Pa." I did, but I also came back better. The wind stirred through the grass, soft and warm. He looked up, eyes wet but smiling. For the first time in 10 years, the valley felt alive again, not ruled by fear, but bound by hope. And as the sun rose over the Carter Ranch, the boy who had once run into the desert broken and lost finally understood his father's last lesson: strength wasn't about vengeance. It was about mercy, and mercy, in the right hands, could change the world.